everybody, and welcome to Intuitiview. I am Kim, and I want to introduce my guest, Andre from Astrology Alert. Hi, Andre.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Kim.
Hello. So I can't wait to talk to you today because well, first of all, there's so much going on, right? There's a lot of stuff happening all over the world. But I wanted to, if you could, maybe just, if we could start by talking about today, there's a full moon. So could you talk about the effect of a full moon? Is there an effect of a full moon that might affect the earth or everyone? And yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the full moon, it does affect everyone, and it'll affect some people more than others. Both of those are true. So one pattern would be if you already are a full moon person, for example, you're more likely to be sensitive to the full moon, even though it may be in totally different signs. So that's one thing. The other thing is the full moon is happening across Leo Aquarius, because right now the sun is in Leo, the moon is in Aquarius. They're opposite signs. That's how you get a full moon. So if you have planets there, the moon will tend to affect you more because the moon triggers those planets. And so, for instance, if someone has, say, Jupiter there, it'll feel better. It'll feel more expansive, maybe a little bit indulgent. But say if it were Mars, that might be more edgy and could have a person feeling, out of sorts. So it depends on the person's alignment. But overall, a lot of people will tell you that they can feel the full moon. Like, for instance, I've heard this multiple times that nurses in hospitals tend to notice that it's more challenging, that stranger things happen.
Yeah.
That's a full moon effect for sure. And then overall, though, the full moon, even with all of that, for the most part, it's auspicious because the moon is very bright. So people that are born on full moons, it's an asset. It's an asset. Now, the downside of the full moon is that it's more energy, but it's also a little more unstable. So you see people with the full moon being bright in some way, but also potentially maybe off center, like in their current political environment. Trump is the full moon, but so is Kamala, and so is Biden too. Biden is not as exact as Trump's, but Biden is a Scorpio with the moon in Taurus. That's same idea, right? It's the beginning of the full moon. It's during the 3 days when he was born, like right after the moon was really full. And Kamala has a Aries to Libra full moon. So it's quite common, and you see this in politicians, public figures, as having it at birth in their chart. Yeah. So
I used to be a preschool teacher, and we would always know when it was a full moon and I think it partly kids, because it was like little 3-year-olds. So kids are such instinctive beings that they just they are very in flow with the now and what's happening and what's happening in the moment. And it just seemed to affect them. And it was always the day we'd have something weird happen, and somebody would throw up in class or something weird would happen. So I can attest to that it's just, and every time I'd be like, is it full moon today? Because it feels like it's a full moon today. And I would look it up, and sure enough, it would always be a full moon. So that's so interesting. And I know I've heard the same thing about hospitals and emergency rooms and things like that it's just a weird night. So I wanted to talk about any major movements that you saw in Trump's chart for August.
Yeah, some of them, all of them. Yeah. Well, yes. So August, I remember saying this early in the year to different people that one switch would be the spring, February, March, April. That was Saturn entering Pisces. So his situation really started to downtrend because the indictment started to roll. And then the August period that we're in now is another major point. That's a totally separate thing. It's not a planetary transit where the planets are. It's within the mechanics of his own chart. The progressions of a chart are based on your own chart in the days after your birth. Mm-hmm. And so in his case, there's this thing that happens to your ascendant. So people will have a certain rising sign, and then it progresses to the next sign and the sign after that over time, but it tends to stay in a sign many, many years. And Trump has been in the Libra, because he was born with Leo rising. Mm-hmm. Then right after his birth, within days, because it's super late Leo, so then he goes into Virgo. And then in 1985, I mean, think about that. That's 38 years ago. In 1985, it went into Libra. And just now, mid-August, it's switching to Scorpio, which I think is not good for him. It's a really bad switch, because when that happens, he happens to have all these planets in progression in Libra, and they all move to the 12th sign. And that, when you put it together with what's happening right now, we know that there are almost certainly two major indictments imminent. That is not good, because the 12th sign is the prison house. I mean, it's also the meditation house, but I'm not aware that Trump does any meditation, or that is just not his realm. No, Trump is an example of just look for the low end, the corruption of anything, and that's what he's doing. So this, to me, is a very bad signal, especially when you put everything else together around, not just that, but that the transits of the big planets, especially Saturn, are not favorable. These types of progressions tend to be really important turning points. I can definitely attest to it, because my own that have also happened widely separated by decades, and they're definite life changes. Life moves in a new direction.
Wow.
And if you start to say, well, what if this helps him? Well, tell me how. How does this work? I don't understand the logic here. He's going to make a comeback in the midst of multiple indictments.
Right.
I don't know. It's too much, well,
and he's such a negative person. So it seems like he'd be one of those people that whatever the negative is, that's what would be happening, or that's what would be going on, because you've explained before that there's always a positive and there's always a negative, and depending on what kind of person you are, or what's happening at the time, you can move into either one. And he is not a positive. I mean, he is one of those people that is like a believer in positive thinking, but I believe it. Yeah, but I know that's ridiculous, and I believe he is one of those people that can just stay laser focused on a task. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to get out of this, and somehow make it happen. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel like there's anything there. It is just his personal will. And it's also based in negativity, because he'll do anything, whether it's lie, cheat, steal, whatever. And so do you feel that way, that he's just more likely to be on that lower level energy, because that's who he is. That's kind of what he's living in right now.
Yeah, no, unquestionably. I think he's always been in that realm, and he's just continued, and being president overamped it. It increased it even more, because an individual like this, who's already narcissistic and egotistical, if you hand them a lot of power, it inflates his ego even more. So this is why, for instance, I mean, when you think about it, how heedless do you have to be? How stupid to ignore subpoenas and flaunt your power that way. He keeps saying, these are my documents. They're not your documents. The law is very clear on this. So now he's facing major trouble from that. And what he did on January 6th, it's again, pretty crazy to think you could get away with this and not suffer consequences. And so he's suffering those consequences now. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's like that. It's the fact that, yes, you can use your will and get a lot done. And he does show you that. That's one thing to learn from everybody. His moment-to-moment focus is stay on it, keep trying, you try everything and you never quit. This is a very useful quality for anyone to have, but I would always suggest to people play it to the upside, because when you play to the upside, you're including other people. You're saying, I want to do this for myself, but it's also in the service of other people. Trump's other people are the mob. He tries to raise people's anger and fear, which is classic fascist, behavior. Yeah. Use a lot of demeaning, dehumanizing language and keep repeating it so that people's reptilian brain turns on and everything is about defending territory, attacking other people. But the problem is that we've seen this before in history, and in the end, it doesn't work. This was Hitler's approach, Stalin, Mussolini. It's tricky. In the end, too many people are against you. And this is the thing about what we're in right now. Yeah, Trump is a scary person, but it's well known that his numbers are below 50% and that more than 50% dislike him. That is not a good plan for being elected president. It might be a good plan to get the nomination, maybe, possibly, because his base is really with him. But in the longer term, it's a huge problem. And the planets tell you that as well, because you see these things switching at different points. Or, for instance, the Saturn cycle, which right now is kind of a quarter of the way where it was when he started his quest to be president. And Saturn has this nasty habit of confronting you with what you've been doing for the last many years. Explain to me how what he's in is a good thing. I don't see it. When you're being indicted by the feds, he's probably going to have 100 charges pretty soon. He's up at 40.
Right.
He's going to be at higher numbers. It's never good because the feds, when they charge you, they're 99% sure. They won't charge you unless they're sure. So it's a big problem. And that's all I can think of here, to
Right. It absolutely. And you can feel it. You can feel that the thing. And I always think with Trump that, he's very much a one-trick pony, right? He uses the same stunts over and over again. And once you get wise to those stunts, they don't work anymore. At least they don't work on most people. He always lies. He always delays. He always, he has the same tactics he uses. It's not like he's this genius. He uses the same tactics over and over again. But yeah, and I wanted to ask you, it seems to me like there has been a shift in I'll say the energy, but I do always wonder what's going on with the planets, because when these shifts in energy happen, I always think there's something going on with astrology that I don't understand. But I always think what is going on with the planets right now, because there's this shift in energy that I have felt. I would say probably for about I don't know, 5 or 6 months, maybe around the spring, where it seemed to shift into a feeling of things coming to the light, things being revealed, the truth coming out. I feel like that the Republicans are not able to hide things the way they were before, and their lies are being exposed much more quickly. And so I'm wondering, is there any shift in the planets, or is there a planet when it comes in, or when, whatever happens that maybe assists in things coming to the light or the truth coming out?
Yeah, I would say I can think of two major movements. When you're doing planetary shifts, for the most part, it's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Eris, the ones that have the bigger orbits, and when they switch and the effects they have. And that the one you just mentioned, spring, Saturn entered Pisces. And so if you think of Pisces as a place where on the high end, you get spirituality, you get growth in that way. But on the low end, it's all the deception and lies and twisting things. And if you put Saturn in that sign, Saturn is like a check. It comes in and it starts to call to account. It's a very earthy, practical energy. So that's one factor for sure. And then the other one is Pluto in the spring, at least for the first 2 months, 3 months, was in Aquarius. Now it's backtracked into Capricorn. It won't be in Aquarius permanently until 2025, but it's already made an entry and makes an even bigger entry next year. And this is a cycle that goes back to 2008. And it's well known that around 2010, even though we had Obama here, in other countries like in Hungary and different places, there was this rising, anti-democratic approach to things, which is what Trump is desperately trying to to implement literally. I mean, he even says, if you give me the presidency again, I'll turn it into a fascist regime. He's open about it.
Yeah.
So,
wonderful.
but the problem is that he's doing this with the cycles basically fading away. Like right now, by the time we get into the 25 period, Pluto is in Aquarius for the next 22 years, which is the next sign, not nearly, in fact, very unfriendly to fascist behavior, because fascist behavior is during the Capricorn period, 08 to 25. Then you have Neptune, which has been in Pisces, which is another, on the downside, disinformation, lies, and so forth. That also switches in 25. And by then, Saturn also goes into Aries, although that's, less of an impact than the other two, let's say. But yeah, bottom line, things are shifting. And I would say you picked it up in the spring on the strength of two of them, which is quite a bit, where those are real energies. They're not made up.
Right.
People do shift when these energies shift. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to say things like in 2008, there's this new direction, or, or in 2011, Neptune entered Pisces, and we've had this growing, disinformation campaign, particularly by Republicans, right? You could see it. I mean, even back in the second Obama term, by 2010, literally, if you go back to the people that came in on that election, what was that about? It was Obamacare, but that was when the Freedom Caucus first came into the House. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing, stuff where I thought, wow, these guys have amped it up from lying through the dog whistle to just totally lying. Like you'd see Ted Cruz say, this is all the Democrats' fault. And you'd say, well, what Democrats? There's no Democrat here. Look at, since then, Trump is always blaming Democrats for his problems. Most of the people that are chasing Trump are Republicans.
Right.
There's even I heard that Jack Smith apparently tilts more to the right, not extreme right, but that he's a more conservative thinker. People like Bill Barr, Mueller, Rosenstein, all these people are Republicans. James Comey, James Comey's wife is Democrat, but he's not. So the point is that he just lies and tries to create a certain perception. And I feel like both his chart and the planet, for everybody, so to speak, it's changing, away from being able to make those things happen in a way that works.
That's so great, because I think that's part of the exhaustion that people feel, is that the constant lying, and when they're lying and they're lying, it does create this energy in you that's kind of like, that's a bit aggrieved, or that's not fair. Why and so I think that has exhausted people, and the constant gaslighting has exhausted people, because as much as you think, oh, they're just lying, they need to stop, it really does. I think Democrats are a more compassionate party, but along with that comes having hurt feelings more easily too. So it works both ways. And so anyway, but yeah, I think people are really, really exhausted, and I think they're ready for the truth to come out, everything to come out, and moving on, fixing things that are broken. Clearly, there are things in our system that are antiquated, that are old-fashioned, that need to be changed. The Supreme Court needs restrictions. The Senate needs term limits, in my opinion. There's certain things we need to go back and look at and change. Is 2025 is there anything in anything happening planetarily? Planetarily, is that a word?
Yeah, no, that's a word. Yeah.
I made
planetarily, it up. Planetarily. Yeah.
That is going to be shifting into a time of change, a bigger, or it's going to be friendly to changes.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's just that what you see in world conditions, and the Second World War is a great example of this, that by the time Hitler was rolling the tanks and started up all of that, he was already too late based on the cycles. Any astrologer would have told him, no, this doesn't look good. You should have done this 5 years ago, because now the energies are shifting. And even so, he succeeded for a while, and then it took a while for the world to catch up, and it took till the mid 1940s really, and into the second part. So I would be really surprised if for instance, the MAGA crowd, they're not going to stop being a pain until at least the next half election or the one after that. I just don't see that, because they're really now programmed to think.
They're so entrenched. Yeah.
They're totally entrenched. So change, yes, it's just that don't anticipate it to be super easy, because those cycles, they don't, even though you can get a planet shifting into a new sign, it doesn't mean it's safe right away. It can take a while as it moves in. Kind of like if you do it in reverse, the Pluto energy in 2008 didn't really click in and start to cause problems until a bit later. And in the US, didn't really become a huge problem until Trump. And that was the middle of the sign, right? Because there it catches the US sun, at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. So it can take a while, but, in the end, the solution to all of this is, the people on the right side, the good side, or whatever you want to call it, Democrats in this case, for sure. Maybe it's always like this, but certainly it's like this now. No question. You got to stick together and vote, and, live through the tension. But think about the fact that it would be much worse if you were on their team, because their team is weak. They've got a lot of problems. They can't get themselves together because of the people that they're, hanging around with. They've gone to the fascists, the thugs, the very thing that Trump is always accusing people like Jack Smith. He calls him a thug and a liar, and he's basically self-confessing. He's just telling you what he is and the people that follow him, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I wanted to know too, have you ever, I know that you've done the charts of these, autocrats and whatever, the oligarchs, but have you ever done any charts for cult leaders?
I have, yeah. Cult leaders show you, sometimes it'll be something like the lunar nodes can be, if they're really close to the sun and moon, you get a kind of excessive hunger, excessive focus that can make a person all at once very magnetic, but also potentially crazy. People like Charles Manson, Jim Jones, these past figures that caused tremendous problems for other people by luring them into a disaster. And Trump has that signature because Trump is born on an eclipse with the two nodes next to his sun and moon.
That was going to be my next question. Does Trump have this? Yeah.
No, he does.
In his chart.
Totally, he does. And one of the things is that the nodes can be a kind of reckless ambition, which kind of defines him. He's just all in on what he does, never relents. And this can be very appealing to people that don't have a strong sense of confidence themselves, because a person that is lacking in their own strong confidence looks outside for someone that'll do that for them.
Right.
And even then, you need to be tilting to the dark side yourself to be listening to someone like this and find it appealing. Normally people say would turn to an Obama figure, someone who's inspiring on the, he says, yes, we can. He doesn't say, yes, I can. He says, yes, we can.
We can, right.
It's that logic where Trump says, only through me. He's like Jesus. He's the political Jesus. Only through me can this happen. So, but yeah, definitely it's in cult figures, you see the notes, but you also see sometimes other curious patterns. Like there's this area of astrology called harmonics, where you look at the type of number that you have in your chart that is more prominent based on, is it a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, based on the separation of the planets. So you see that in Trump's chart, he has the fifth harmonic really strong. And the fifth harmonic is a person that imposes they have a knack for imposing their vision on the world. It's a purely personal vision, but they're able to magnetize a lot of people doing this. And another person who had this massive fifth harmonic was Hitler. Same thing, the ability to, he would talk, and apparently there are recordings of Hitler talking normally, and he didn't have that screaming voice, but in public, he had this knack for inciting fear and, and anger, which is another thing. I mean, think about our current situation. The way these things tend to work when you have a fascist is that you need turbulent conditions. That's why Trump is always trying to instill chaos. He knows that if things are chaotic, his odds improve. Well, it's not chaotic, which, by the way, I mean, think about it. For him, people say, oh, he's really lucky. This guy is Teflon, he's really lucky. Well, if you were really lucky, the economy now wouldn't be good, because then you could say the economy's bad. I can come in and save you. Well, the economy's better than it was when you were here. So that kind of reduces your argument.
All in masks when he was here.
Yeah, no, and I mean, Biden can say, hey, the economy went into the tank through COVID, and I brought it back, and it's better than it was. So don't even point to Trump. Trump's economy was very ordinary. He can tell you all he likes, but he created less jobs even before COVID than Obama had. Then he lost a bunch of jobs. The net result was horrible, right? So if he were as lucky as people say he is, then right now things would be rough, so he could have something to say, right? Or if he were as lucky as people think he is, maybe COVID happens in the first year of the next administration when he's not there. It doesn't get thrown on him. And he had to live through COVID, which would never be easy for anybody. If you're a president, that's a major test. But of course, like he does everything wrong, he did it totally backward. Instead of helping people, he started to play games. And so then that was used against him. So overall, this is another pattern where because the planets are moving away from this energy rather than toward it. Like if this had happened, if we're in 2016 now, with Trump having been president in 2010 or whatever, that would be way more complicated, right? But because it's near the end, I mean, you start to see in the world, for example, people now in England, now they're saying they didn't like Brexit anymore, right? They thought Brexit was, now it's not a good idea. Or Brazil got rid of Bolsonaro. In Spain, there was an election and there was an expectation that the far right was going to ascend. They dropped votes. Yeah, and it's still the Socialist Party in charge. These are good signals. We're going to find out, by the way, in a few days. Let's see if these Ohio Republicans are successful in this, trying to do this 60% routine on the public, can they do that? It's not looking that great, because the public is aware. And kind of like you said earlier, I think you mentioned something around messaging, or like people are continuously upset. It's true, but we're aware of what's going on. The danger with these people is when you're not aware, because then they'll take advantage and they can, do something with it. But as long as you're seeing it in the news, it's usually a good sign, because someone somewhere is doing something about it. Like, this thing with the lawyers, all these crooked lawyers, Giuliani and Sidney Powell. And but the law organization, they police themselves. They're trying to disbar them all, because they know this is really bad. And the public should encourage them to do more, to be more and more strict and say, no, you can't be a lawyer and say one thing in public and then go in court and say, oh, Your Honor, I didn't say that. That's what Giuliani did. He's yelling and screaming, fraud, fraud, fraud. Then when the judge asked him, he said, no, Your Honor, I'm not alleging fraud. Well, wait a second. You were just out there inciting a riot. Now you tell me that there's no fraud. To me, that should be illegal. Illegal, completely illegal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's such a destructive thing to do, to society. To you're basically, what you're doing is you're endorsing lies, plain and simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you too about. Well, first, before we leave this subject, I wanted to about the cult leader thing. I noticed a major change that happened during COVID, in the way that, because some people, because of Trump, some people died, right? In their party that didn't wear masks and didn't, what believed him and whatever, and took the weird stuff he was, trying to flog or trying to sell to the public. So they either left, or they passed away, or they kind of moved away from him. The ones that stayed, what I noticed was that they became even more worshipful. It was almost like a cult worship. It was, and it's always been a bit cultish, but it seemed to go up a notch during COVID. And I think part of that is just people's fear they're a fearful bunch anyway. And to go through something like COVID, I think it broke some of them. So they just like clung to the person they thought was going to save them. But was there something planetarily going on during COVID that that had to do with fear and had to do with maybe, well, yeah, it just had to do with people being afraid.
Yeah, for sure. The COVID period, this was what I mentioned a number of times. There was this astrologer, my namesake, this French guy, André Barbeau. In 2011, he published a book and he said there's going to be a pandemic in 2020. And the reason he said that is he was a specialist in that type of astrology. And he had looked at prior cycles of Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto. And when those three are doing certain patterns, but especially a conjunction, in 2020, they were together. So this is worldwide. It's going to cause a problem. And Saturn, Pluto, that is literally the definition of fear. I mean, if you want to strike major fear, for example, 9/11 happened on a Saturn opposite Pluto, right? If a person has that in their chart or conjunct, that is fearful. It's the energy of death, you know, with Pluto. Pluto is the underworld, the lord of the underworld. Saturn is a harsh energy. So absolutely. And it did generate fear. I mean, you remember back then that we all thought for a while that we couldn't even open our mail, that you had to like take out bleach and start cleaning the...
We were scared of our groceries. Yeah, I remember.
I know. I would hear the Amazon person or the UPS person and think, well, what if maybe they're carrying the lethal thing, which was, of course, total insanity, but that's where we were. And, you know, then even if it started to cool a little bit, that whole year, there was the George Floyd thing and here, and there was unrest in many parts of the world because people resisted in different countries, the COVID and so forth. So yeah, no, the astrology was there, but those planets now, but by now Jupiter is way left out. It's just Pluto left in that sign, has a little more to go. Saturn is long gone, and so is Jupiter. So there's no conjunction. You know, there isn't that same pattern. It'll return, but it'll be years before you see Saturn and Pluto, for example.
So I wanted to ask you about, let's talk about health for a minute and talk about Mitch McConnell. Have you looked at his chart, or do you have any ideas about what's maybe, in his, I would say, short-term future?
Yeah, it's not good because with astrology, you always look at what is taking place in the person's life. So you don't look at the chart without that. Without having the evidence, you can say things and you might be right, but you might not, because the theme can show up in many different ways. Now, you can then say things like, well, he's a certain age and so forth, and maybe make a better projection without seeing what's going on. But in his case, we know, and by the way, I don't have a birth time, so I'm limited in only using the birthday. That's all I know from Mitch McConnell. But even just with the day, the sun position isn't going to change that much. And we heard in the spring he had that fall, and that was the Saturn cycle, which separately I said to you, you would have picked up. For example, the way you put it was lies being exposed, and more of a clamp down on that. But for him, he is a Pisces right at the beginning of the sign. And if you are his age, and you usually would have to have underlying conditions, which apparently he has. Anyway, the bottom line is that he fell down the stairs, and now it's not an unlikely projection to say maybe he had a stroke then too. I mean, why did he fall down the stairs? Maybe he had an event. And the Saturn is in that region until at least next January, February. That is not a good thing for a person in his situation. The end of the year between October and December is especially dangerous because the Saturn is going to move back in retrograde and stop. That it does a station. A station is the most intense part of the planet. And so around that time, his best bet would be to pull back and focus exclusively on his health. But the way these guys tend to do it is he'll be doing the opposite. He'll get all busy because Saturn is a work energy. And so he might work himself into another event, around that time. If he gets to next year by the spring or so, then the odds improve that it won't be as problematic for him. But then he has another planet in there as well, that is also making an aspect. So I think his time in office is probably limited. If I had to guess, I don't think he's going to last too long, because it's too complicated when you have planets like that on you. In the context of the fact that real things have already happened. We've seen two now that are pretty scary. He looked like he was having an event, some kind of.
Yeah. I heard seizure. That's what I heard, was a seizure, some kind of seizure. But but with him, I always saw that if he lost the Senate again, which he did, if he was minority leader again, that he wouldn't run the next time. So I don't really see him running again. I think he may retire. But
when is he up though? Because is he 2024? I don't remember what his was.
I think he's 2024.
Yeah, well, in that case, but the only thing is, that chart. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I would say to Mitch, just pull back, go relax. This is not a good situation. Do not hang around. It's too risky.
And they have such a hard time letting go of power. These people, they just cling.
Yeah.
And at what cost? I just think it's so weird. They're so weird.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? That this is like the. Separately, you could say it's like a life truth that momentum, which is like you get the train moving, is your friend in a way, but it's your enemy when you need to get off, right? I remember when I was a distance runner, the hardest thing to do was to rest, because the more I ran, the more I wanted to run, and then it would start to work against me. I would do poorly because I was too tired. All I needed to do was just back off, do the opposite of what you're used to doing. So in his situation, these people get all used to the power and the influence, and maybe he might even be feeling responsible, though I know for some people, responsibility in Mitch McConnell, they think, no, he's just like all the other evil Republicans. But he's actually not the worst. As bad, this is the thing about the era we're in, that he worked with Joe Biden on some things, and he's been mostly anti-Trump, but he also, did the Supreme Court thing. And so there aren't too many heroes over there. I'm sorry, but
no, there's not. I know that I wish there were more, but there really aren't. I agree. So what do you see with what is going to be happening? Because let me start with this. I felt that for whatever reason, from about August, the end of August to the end of the year, it just felt like kind of a shit show. And I'm trying to figure out what is going on. But I did remember, one of the things that's going to be going on is the Republican debates and stuff. So what's going to be happening with the planets between like September and the end of the year? Are there any big shifts or any big changes that might be chaotic?
You always get, for instance, right now we're on Venus retrograde until October, and that is notorious for people pushing back against the established order. So, for example, that's why you have the artists striking and different strikes where there's pushback against what they're being offered and so forth. But then you've got there's a Saturn station in November, there's a Pluto station in October. So there's always enough there just from the stations alone. Then there's a Neptune station in November, Uranus stations too. It definitely fits that when you see planetary stations, one after the other, yes, that things can be tense, but it's what you say too. We're in that entry point into the election year. We know that the situation is very, very tense because Trump is about to be indicted, and that's going to cause, I think he'll just amp it up even more and, yell and scream about it and so forth. And as you put it, imagine the debates, what they're going to bring up. So absolutely. They should see all kinds of stuff. I mean, entertaining on one level, but also don't expect every single thing to be perfect. And, you have to count on at least one or two things that are more disappointing around it. But I still remain optimistic overall, because whenever I feel some pessimism, I keep in mind the numbers. The numbers don't favor what they're doing because the base is too small to capture the entire electorate, and they're on the wrong side of two or three things that are lethal, like women's rights. That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life, what the Supreme Court did. How they didn't think that through and not realize this is going to cause a tremendous problem for us. But, they're true believers. And so I think on that alone, I think they have a major problem, because just running on that could be enough for Democrats, because no matter who they put in. I don't know. Are you still in the sense, do you have a sense that Trump isn't even going to make that he won't somehow get there?
I feel like I've never seen him or DeSantis making it as the nominee. And I'm wondering too, if there may be some deal in the future that includes him never running for public office again. There may be something like that. But I've never seen that. And if he runs, if I'm wrong about that and he runs, like you said, great, because he just doesn't have enough support to win. He just doesn't.
He doesn't. No.
He doesn't even have the levers of power. I mean, if it was going to happen, it would have happened in 2020, because he held all the levers of power and he still couldn't do it. He still lost it was a big loss. It was not a little loss. And so with him not holding any of the levers of power anymore, and Putin being so weak, he's not even in a strength position at all. So the chances of him being able to cheat or change the outcome in some other way is not even a possibility. So it wouldn't happen. So fine, if he's the nominee, fine. But yeah, I have never seen that, and I've just never seen that. So, and what you say, like there's definite, you can just even using common sense. One pattern could be if there's a charge that he's, really looking at jail time and he can plead out, so he won't do that. Or the other thing that I keep bringing up, but so far in this sense, he's been Teflon, except for when he caught COVID, but he's got some health aspects there that are very dangerous. Absolutely.
And so, in fact, there was an astrologer on my site who pointed to this conjunction happening in 24 being the possibility of a judge or some authority figure helping him, which I could see, except for the fact that it would be like maybe that, and where the conjunction happens is very risky to his health. It just triggers this thing where he could have some kind of thing, a stroke or aneurysm or something that knocks him out. It's actually for Trump, the jam he's gotten himself into, about the only way he could save face is if he genuinely had to stop because he had a health thing that stopped him. Then people would say, well, his health broke down. Other than that, it's just like a giant humiliation, the way he's carrying on, hoping that he's going to win.
And if he's in the race, flapping his gums, have it with his big mouth, he's going to lose the Senate and the House again for the Republicans. He is a loser in that way. He's never won anything since 2016. And even that was, I'm sure things will come out as we go on, but it was clearly stolen in some way. It was clearly cheated in some way. So, it's just, like you said, the numbers aren't there.
No, they're not. And it's also not, it's not favorable to him. He doesn't have enough to work with to be able to pull off something that major. And, because some people then can say, well, okay, you're right. He doesn't have a number, but what if this thing with no labels or Colonel Colonel West, I think his name is, the professor, maybe he takes votes. I don't see that either, because when you look at Biden, Kamala especially, her chart looks way too strong in 2024 for me to think, well, really, she would lose? That doesn't make sense. And Biden's is perfectly fine. It's close to the same place where it was in 2016.
Right.
So, I mean, in 2020, sorry. So then you just don't see the problem, and DeSantis, as you predicted, I was looking for the Jupiter cycle in May switched to help him, but it hasn't helped him. And so once you don't see any improvement through that, and even if with DeSantis, let's say that something happened to Trump, because I heard someone analyze it and say, these candidates that are running against Trump are counting on something happening to him so they can come in and be the scavengers, right? So then maybe DeSantis takes over the lead if Trump can't run or something like that. But DeSantis runs into the astrology problem in the middle of 24 because he loses the Jupiter support, and then it's just Saturn opposing him, and that's just not a good formula. It doesn't work. And DeSantis is very unlikable. He doesn't seem to know how to talk to people,
He's I can't think of a less, he's more unappealing than Trump, if that's.
Well, no. Trump, the thing is, Trump at least is appealing to people like him. He's very appealing to people that see life that way. DeSantis, you don't know what he's appealing to. He's in this, no one seems to. Apparently, he was doing an event and he was offering having a beer with him. It was going to cost $50 per person, and nobody was buying. So then they changed it to $1, and he got 35 people. Well, that's not a great endorsement. For someone who wants to be president, you'd think you'd get at least a few hundred, maybe 1,000, some number where you could say people like you. So yeah, he's hurt. So, but then the thing is, no matter who they put in, even if they pick the most reasonable person to put in there, then they have to defend the indefensible, because they can't then say, well, no, I'm against, I'm like the Democrats around the abortion issue. Well, that's not going to play well with the base, and he'll lose votes. They're in a tough spot, at this point in time. And so I look at it optimistically by thinking maybe the reason we're suffering so much, seeing all these problems and all these dangerous people, in a way is a positive thing, because it makes it hard for them to win. So, there's that, because imagine that Trump was not here. Maybe by now they would have had a normal person running, and they would be more of a threat to Biden, right? At this point, maybe the voters would have settled down, because a lot of this is because, if you think about it, he keeps egging them on. He does another rally and he says more things, and then he truths, that thing. I mean, it's so amazing that these guys don't get it, that fascists always call their mechanics truth. Like apparently in Russia, pravda means the truth, and Russia is notorious for making everything up. Everything is propaganda, right? But if the people that follow you don't understand it, then they're stuck in that gear, and he's making it worse. So these people are probably going to be worked up for years. We have to assume that they're not going to, like that overnight in 2025, suddenly get their head together around it. Eventually, you'll read the articles. Oh yeah, I was in a cult, but I didn't realize that I was in a cult.
Right.
You don't say.
Yeah, I totally believe that as well. And so I wanted to ask you too about, I have a couple more questions for you. And one is about, in my video for 2023, when I did the year predictions, I saw the overarching theme of the year was David and Goliath. It was a lot of the little guy taking on the big guy, or the masses taking on the strong men. And I saw a lot of strikes, and I saw specifically Starbucks and Disney what came up, and I'm like, that's really amazing, because they don't, they usually kind of fall into line. But is there anything that is happening with the planets this year, or at any time this year, that's kind of lending? And we're seeing SAG, all of the writer strike and everything. Is there anything that's lending itself to the idea of kind of the masses coming together to fight together against a bigger a regime, or the CEOs or whatever? Has there been anything going on with the planets that would lend itself to that kind of energy?
Well, the Venus retrograde cycle alone will do that, although that's been limited more to the second half of the year. But that's when we've seen the strikes.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a definite pattern there on that alone. And the other thing is, you can just see what is happening, based on what you said and where we are now. The numbers, I heard this, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, that right now incomes are rising faster than inflation. So that's a clear sign that the employer is giving more money to the employers, and because they're demanding it. So it's not all, people say, oh, it's all profit and so forth. No, that's not true. Right now, that's what's taking place. So that is the little person getting something from the big person. And
right.
It's the same. That's how unions strike and get something. And
right.
of course, the one that I think UPS already agreed. I think with the actors, it's more complicated because they're stuck in a model where the studios and the people that are the big money players, they've also lost a lot of money because of streaming. So then they're kind of stuck, and it may take longer, but eventually they'll probably have to give them something as well. And so, yeah, a long answer to say 100% on the Venus retrograde alone, in the sense that this happened, it appears to have happened late in the year, right? If I said, well, why else would it be? I would probably point to the Pluto and Aquarius. My feeling is that Pluto and Aquarius, which is where it's going to be from 2025 to 2042, Aquarius is a people sign. It's a sign connected to democracy. So that tends to help the individual more, right? The idea of, spreading wealth, of making it more equitable and so forth. And it did spend 3 months, there earlier in the year. Although I would have to say that's probably a bit of a reach in some ways as well. So probably the Venus retrograde. Which, by the way, another thing about Venus retrograde, Venus does this thing where it has an 8-year cycle where it goes around once in a year, but 8 years after any start, it goes back to where it was. Because the other 7 years, it's not quite in the same place. It's somewhere else. But then in the 8th year, it returns. And that's another reason why the Trump situation is really problematic, because Venus is now where it was when he was coming down the escalator. That was a high point, but this is the consequence. Like 8 years, 8 years is known to be the average span of relationships. And it's because it's Venus, which is a love planet. And so people after 8 years get tired of each other, just statistically, because many people survive the 8 years and go on to more 8-year blocks, right? But 8, 16, 24, 32 tend to be relationship tests of sorts. And so if you see a planet return to where it was, and then you look around, where was he 8 years ago? He's launching this thing, he's on top of the world, and now he's looking at all the consequences of what he did then. It's everything that grew, came from there. And in his chart, Venus lives in the prison house, and it rules his career house. That is not a good plan. I'm sorry. No, that is like thumbs down, on that, based on where it is right now as we speak, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you about was Texas and Abbott. Have you ever looked at his chart?
I have.
What is wrong with that? What is wrong with that guy?
I know. I think what is wrong with him, he has some pressures, but I just can't find. Well, okay, let me back to. I don't know his birth time too. He's another chart where it's just a day, right?
Right.
With the day though, it's like how I couldn't see him losing the last election. It didn't look right to me that there wasn't enough there to take him out. And so, what are people expecting? That do you think he's going to be recalled, or like what's going to happen? You probably have to wait until he comes up for election again, but that's years away from now.
Right.
So the only thing with a guy like that is that no matter if his chart shows it or not, the way to defang him and reduce his power is by make sure that the federal government, isn't also Republican to help him along even more, and to establish limits on his malfeasance. But it's bad. It's bad. Texas is one of the worst states because they keep implementing all these rules that are to reduce people's rights. Is that what you were getting at, or were you?
Yeah, and just the meanness of him. There is something so mean and cruel about him. He's very the way that they go after immigrants, and the way that how they have that whatever that thing is in the water with all the wire and all that stuff, and how it's killing people, and not only killing them but torturing them basically before they die. I just think that's why I said, what is wrong with him? Is there something in the chart of people like that, that they just have a or like in a Hitler chart where they just have a crueler nature, or there's a kind of not uncompassionate or a sadistic side?
Yeah,
I
no,
always think of them as sadistic.
there's definitely in every chart, because you see, in any chart, I believe he's got Scorpio energy. Like Scorpio is a sign that on the high end is a truth, the focus on truth, and also change and transformation, growth through leaving the past and becoming something new. It makes for great psychologists, psychotherapists. They're really tuned into the energies of change. That's the high end of Scorpio. The low end is really bad. The low end is like murderers and criminals and sadistic people, because it's the sign of death. And if you go down that way, it's not good. And typically you'll see with these people, almost always, you look at their history, it's like people that look back on Hitler. He was already a weird kid with, the type of kid that is maybe killing beetles or something, for fun. And then they move up from there with this disconnected type of energy. And I haven't studied Abbott too much, but I'm sure I would find all kinds of things that would be really questionable. And now he's just acting them out. And he thinks this is the right thing to do. And by the way, there are many people in Texas that think the same way. Otherwise, they wouldn't elect him. So there's that, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's the truth. And
that's true.
Unless the voting situation is made more fair, so he can't throw people off the rolls and get rid of, voting stations and things like that. But I don't think even that's going to help them. Do you have a feeling that in the next election, they'll be able to in any way manipulate the voting I don't see it. I just
him or Republicans in general.
Republicans, him, the whole thing, because they're always trying to play those games to prevent people from voting, basically.
Right. And I did feel like there'd be some kind of like push or program or something for more mail-in voting. So I think that a lot of people are going to be voting early, and a lot of people are going to be voting by mail. Because I did see the lines being long in places like Tennessee and places you expect, the South and places like that. But I didn't see like overall the kind of stuff we have seen in years past. It feels like there's something they're going to do that's just more helping people to vote in different ways and to vote earlier and that kind of thing, so they can spread it out and there aren't these long lines. I did see something weird in Ohio. So I don't know if there's going to be some kind of, I don't know if it's actually cheating or just kind of, making things difficult in Ohio. And Florida and Texas, I always feel like they're way more purple than we think. They're because I do think there's a lot of cheating going on, throwing votes out and kicking people off the voting rolls and things like that. So until they get a handle on that in those states, and it's really hard when everybody's Republican at the top, it's hard to fix that stuff. But if they can, like you said, maybe through the federal government, start to fix some of these things as we get a normal Supreme Court and that kind of thing, maybe go through and fix some of these voting things that are going on, because I think there's a lot of weird stuff going on there. But that's kind of what I saw with the voting. I felt like Democrats are going to win everything. And I think you're right. I think it's because of all of these awful policies and these awful directions they're going with guns too. 70-80% of the public are not with them. These crazy abortion laws, they're just not popular at all. So they're making themselves even less popular, if that's what it is.
No, exactly. And that's the thing that, the people worry a lot about Trump, but just realize Trump is very popular with his base. He's not popular with the rest of the country. And if anything, he scares the rest of the country. So fear is the best motivator. If you want to get votes, save himself running as the people go, wow, we got to go stop that. Right. So
absolutely. I absolutely think that. Well, Andrea, I could talk to you all day. I could talk to you all day,
Likewise,
another hour
likewise.
at least.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was fun. So thank you so much for coming by, and please come back. And is there anything you want people to know coming up in your channel? I actually want to tell people that you and your sister did a great video on Arnold Schwarzenegger
Oh yeah, yeah.
that
Thank you.
I
That was
found
fun.
really fascinating. And that was a really interesting, uh, you know, collaboration
Yeah.
that you guys did. So I want to recommend that. But anything else that you want to tell people where they can find you? Yeah.
You know, Astrology Alert. If they just search Astrology Alert now, I believe I come up every time. You know,
Yeah.
because yeah. So that's basically it. And I just keep posting as I see, you know, things develop, and depending on what else I'm doing and so forth. So I'll be there in some measure, either collaborating with someone or putting up a video explaining something about the politics. So yeah, for sure.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming by. Thank you,
Pleasure.
everybody, for watching, and we will talk to you again soon.
Bye, everyone.